If you've ever been asked to supply photos to your website designer or your website developer, while an iPhone or a modern iPhone or an Android phone is certainly capable of doing the job, it's more than just pointing the phone going snap, snap, snap. There are some specific things that I'll be looking for, or your web designer will be looking for when they get those photos from you. So what I'm going to run through today is some tips for taking photos for your website. So the first thing we're going to look at is why it's a bit tricky. And the first thing I think is that social media platforms have trained us to take vertical videos. So we're always holding the cameras like that. Instagram wants them that way. Facebook tends to want them that way as well. Often a lot of photos that I get have been taken in that vertical portrait orientation. But even on a mobile optimized website, we still want the photos that way. If you think about it, even if you're scrolling down a website, it's not very often you'll see an image take up the whole screen on your phone. It's generally a strip in the middle. You'll see some text above it or below it, or some headings above it or below it. So by and large, you want to hold your phone in that horizontal aspect ratio while you're taking photos for your website. And the second issue there is to do with responsive design and cropping. So you take a photo like that, and so much of it will appear on the desktop rendition of your website. But as your screen gets narrower, the images crop in certain ways to make them fit. And so often, a lot of the times, I'll get photos supplied that are just too tightly cropped in on the subject. The thing that you've taken the photo off is right up against the edge of the photo, which leaves no room for cropping at all. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind as we're moving on to the next step. So the next point I'd like to run through is, what I need, what I'm looking for. So I mentioned before, photos taken in that wide horizontal or landscape aspect ratio for a start. The second thing I need is, and I've mentioned this previously, space around the subject. So don't have whatever you're taking the photo of right up against the edge of the frame. Take a step or two back so there's a little bit of breathing room around the edge. I actually made some notes here. How about I expand them? Oh yeah, I will demonstrate this in a minute. Extra points if you can supply the photo in 4:3 or 3:2 aspect ratio. Now on an iPhone, if you slide across to the left, you'll see you can change the aspect ratio there. You might already be on 4:3 and that's fine, but if you're on 16:9, change it back to 4:3, and you can see that makes the photo a little squarer. Which, again, in terms of, if we're displaying it on a phone, is probably a better aspect ratio to use. Now, in terms of space around the subject, again, be mindful of the fact that depending on how it's seen, the left and right edges of the photo could get cropped a little bit as we move from a widescreen down to like an iPad down to a phone. That will change a little bit. And the other thing to keep in mind too is if we're using the photo in a header section of your website. So if you look at like a laptop screen or a typical desktop monitor, that aspect ratio is around about 16:9, which is pretty close to what your photo is going to be if you take it that way and you've got that 16:9 aspect ratio fit. It's about the same, width versus height ratio of your phone screen, more or less. But if you think about looking at that on a laptop or a desktop, again, you'll notice that not very often is the photo that whole height. Generally, there'll be space above it, perhaps, or space below it on the screen, which means that somewhere top and bottom, that's being cropped to a much shorter versus wide aspect ratio. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you're taking photos and that you think they're specifically going to be used in headers, make sure that there's plenty of room above and below the photo to allow us to crop in on that for a header section. Another point, be mindful of the background. This catches up so many people. They'll take a photo of something and there'll be some rubbish in the background that somebody didn't notice, or there'll be a workplace health and safety violation. Somebody's not wearing the right boots or the right helmet, or like these things go on. So when you're taking a photo of something, you'll have your subject in the middle of the frame generally. Run your eyes around the edge of the frame around that and just look at the background. Is there anything in there that shouldn't be there, that's messy, some unmowed lawn or some weeds in the corner of the yard or whatever it happens to be? And if there is, tidy it up or move the frame or change your angle or something. So that's it. Keep an eye on unflattering stuff in the background. And the other thing to do is pay attention to lighting as well. Lighting in photography and videography is very, very important, and we could spend half an hour talking about that. But just to keep it simple, when you're looking at the frame and what you're taking a photo of, where are the shadows being cast? And the area's been blown out, which means it's too bright and that's white. That's one of the good things that if you're using a phone to take your photo with, they tend to do a good job at using their computational photography as side of things to deal with those. But especially if you're using a regular camera, if you're trying to get the subject lit well and the sun's over behind them, that area is going to be blown out, or that's going to be exposed properly and they're going to be in the dark. So think about where the light's coming from. Is it coming from over your shoulder? Is it coming from over their shoulder? Is it coming from, where's it coming from? Where are the shadows? And just if there's anything there that is going to be unflattering, move yourself or the subject or change the light source or something. I mean, if it's outside, you can't really move the sun, but you can change where you are relative to the sun. And if you're inside, fluorescent lights like this can be a bit unflattering too. Get yourself near a window and use natural light where you can. That tends to make things look a little bit nicer than the harsh fluoro lights that you see inside a lot of the time. All right, so that's what we need. Now I'm going to really oversimplify this to what I'm calling the 4-shot rule. And it's more of a guideline than a rule, but you know what I mean. So first of all, you want a wide shot. If you're using a phone, use the 0.5 lens, the extra ultra wide angle lens, and get a really wide shot. These can be useful because if for your header section, if I have to crop a lot off the top or the bottom, that ultra wide shot, the 0.5x shot, will often leave the subject in the middle and lots of space around the outside. You might look at that and think, there's too much space. Take the photo anyway. You never know, I might be able to use it. Second one's a medium. This is where you might look at the 1x, or depending on your device, maybe even a 2x, but get it a little bit closer. This is where your subject is more in the frame. Again, not hard up against it. We don't ever really want to have the subject hard up against the frame, but it is a bit closer, halfway between zoomed in and wide angle, and then get up close. You don't have to use the zoom lens on your camera to do that. You can just take a few steps forward and take it that way. But, if you've got what I call a flagship, iPhone or Samsung or something like that, that's got the 3 lenses on your back, you've got 3 lenses there. That's a kind of a mental prompt to use all of them: wide, medium, close. The close-up shot is where you can get a little bit creative sometimes. It might be a particular piece of detail or something like that. It's not always applicable, I know, but think of that, and unless look, this is stupid, take a close-up shot anyway, because you never know, I might be able to use it. And then the fourth one, if you're feeling a bit creative, is weird. So this is where you might change the angle a bit, get down on the ground and take the photo up at something, or high up and down, or sort of through something else. Be a little bit creative with this one. Take a photo that's not the normal kind of photo or the normal kind of angle that you would expect to see. So if you think about those 4, wide, medium, close, weird, if you take 4 photos like that of everything that you need to take a photo of and send to me, one of them will be useful in the context of where I need to put it. And finally, send me the originals. Now, when you text or email pictures around, sometimes, depending on how it's done, that can compress the image. So by the time I get it, it's too small, and in context, it's going to look grainy or bad quality, whatever the case may be. So we really want to make sure that I'm getting, and I'm going to skip. The more sets of hands it passes through, the more likely it is to happen. Which comes down to the last point. We want the original images from the device that took the photo. So if you've got somebody else who's organised somebody else to take the photos on their phone, and they text them to that person, who emails them to you, who texts them to me, or whatever the case may be, pretty good chance what I get is going to be mostly unusable. So whatever device was used to actually take the photos, get a hold of that device and get the originals off of there, upload them to Dropbox or do something else like that that's not going to compress the size of the images. And this might be a little bit harsh and a little bit blunt, But if you can't do that, get somebody else to look after the photography for you, because this is really important. It's pointless taking the photos and sending me compressed, rubbishy versions that I can't use anyway. So I'll zoom out there so you've got all of the notes on the screen in front of you at the moment. But the main things to keep in mind for me is if you just remember that four-shot rules, four-shot, yeah, okay, you know what I'm trying to say. Wide, medium, close, weird. Take 4 photos of everything at those different, from those different angles and aspect ratios. Make sure you get me the originals rather than emailed or texted versions that have gone through a few different sets of hands. Pay attention to your background, have a look at whether it's well lit. If you sort of look after those things, pretty good chance the photos that I get are going to be fine. You don't need an expensive camera. Any modern phone, iPhone or Android or whatever else, if it's made within the last few years and you've bought a reasonably high-end one rather than a cheap budget one, the photos that come off those will be fine. All right, they're my guidelines for website photography. Thanks for watching. See you later.